everyone, welcome back whenever and wherever you are. This week we're talking about the criminal law, and I think we'll also be able to talk about it in a way that I think many of you will find very interesting, because we're going to get dirty. We're going to go straight to fake or deep fakes, and we're going to look at fake pornography in particular. And look, let's face it, nobody wants to do that alone. So I have a visitor with us today. Actually, before I say anything else, I'm making light of this, but this is not a light subject. Some of you may, in fact, find some of the things that we're going to talk about. I don't know what they are yet, but some of those things may well be disturbing. If you think that is likely to be you, please take care. I'll make sure that there's a transcript available, and we can talk about these images or these issues in different ways. So, sorry, that probably really should have started there. I do want to keep it light because it is actually a really grim topic, and I'm not really sure how to navigate that appropriately. But let me introduce you to Dr Nicole Shackleton, one of our colleagues from RMIT, the Graduate School of Business and Law. She is a law lecturer. For those of you who have met her, you might have done so in the context of company law or ethics and practice management. But for the business students, probably less likely to come across her because her research area is very much in the confines of law. And she looks at the intersections between gender, technology, and the law. So in particular, she looks at online abuse, artificial intelligence, and I really like the way that she describes this, the design of safe technologies for intimacy. And I think, we all live in a world where these are part of our day-to-day life, part of the way that we meet people and interact with people. So I think it's really important to have people thinking about how to do that safely, legally, and without issues. So welcome, Nicole. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Kath. I'm really excited to chat to you today.
So tell me a little bit about, I always start with this actually, what led you to doing what it is that you do now?
That's a really excellent question. I think there's a couple of things. I really loved studying law, and I did a small amount of practice, but for me, I really found research around how the law actually impacts people and how people experience the law to be the part of being a lawyer that I found the most interesting. And the best way to be able to go down that track is to go into academia. So I decided to move into the research and teaching of law. And I love teaching. I have taught non-law students as well too. I often teach cybersecurity students.
Oh, right. Sorry, yeah. I've pigeonholed you when I shouldn't.
No, that's fine. I haven't been lucky enough yet to do that at RMIT, but some of my previous institutions I have taught non-law students before, and criminology students studying international criminal law and stuff like that. So I think that the law, it does tend to get pigeonholed a lot about just for law students, but we all experience the law every day. We all interact with the law every day, even when we don't realize it. And as technology becomes more ingrained in our life, it already is to so much of an extent, we rely on technology, but it's going to become even more so. And so there's a real intersection there with how the law and technology interact, and how we then interact with technology that's shaped by or not shaped by regulation and the law. And I really I've always been interested in women's rights and those types of things, and just making a more equal society. So when I started looking at how technology impacts certain groups in particular, I really realized that just like with most things, there is not only unequal access to technology, but the way technology shapes and impacts on people is different based on gender and obviously sex and literacy and all these other aspects as well too.
It's really interesting. One of the things that we're talking about a lot in this unit is the question of what makes a good law. And we kind of butt that up on one side, what makes a good law or what makes a law good, both sides of that question. And we also then look at when does law get in the way? So we kind of have this ongoing battle between, scholars like Lessig and Fuller on one hand, and then we've got the permissionless innovation guys, on the other side, sort of saying, look, we need to go for it. And one of the things, we've got a group of potential future CEOs here watching us, talking about us. They've got great ideas. They're studying hard. They're exploring all of these new and emerging technologies. And law just gets in their way, right? And one of the ways that they feel that law, well, they might feel that law gets in their way, kind of hope it doesn't, but is in their love lives right now. What can I and what shouldn't I be doing with these technologies? Now, it's a very blunt instrument that we're using to compare with, but part of what we're talking about this week is effectively what makes behaviour criminal, and when would a company or an employee or somebody in an organisation be responsible for criminal outcomes with these kind of technologies?
Yeah.
But going back a step, I mean, one of the things, so I know that you're particularly interested in the use of technologies in intimate situations. There is a lot that's going on in that space. Can you tell me a little bit about what's happening in that space in Australia at the moment, and what these students might be thinking about or looking out for?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Cass. So let's kind of, and it's really interesting you said Lessig, because I was just about to mention Lessig.
Yeah. The guy spent a lot of time looking at Lawrence Lessig.
Yes.
We call him Larry around here. We're just
Larry. Lawrence Lessig is a super interesting theory to think about, the way that we kind of change the behavior of an online person via, multiple different aspects. And but anyway, so
it is a bit mean that he calls us pathetic dots, though.
It is a bit mean that he calls us pathetic dots. So if we kind of think about, if we think about intimacy, and I use intimacy because some people are uncomfortable with the term sex technologies, but also we are talking about intimacy in terms of connection, human connection, and whether you're using your sex tech to have a very brief human connection, or using it on your own to have a connection with yourself, or you're using it for connection with a long-term partner, there is intimacy involved in that. So there's a number of kind of spaces, and part of the issue with the law in the intimacy space is that the law is incredibly risk averse. So the law looks for risk. It looks for where the potential harm is going to be, and then it does something around the regulation of that. And when, apologies everyone,
we've had Zeus.
Hello, this is Dr. Zeus. He's joined us for this conversation. When technology is about intimacy, because that can make people feel a bit uncomfortable, the law often only looks for risk and ignores benefit. And so, for example, we have new laws that have been introduced into federal parliament to deal with deepfake technology, and I'll turn back to that in a moment, because that's, a real kind of hot button issue at the moment. But a lot of people use forms of toys or kind of enhancements around their intimacy, and that is not regulated because people don't want to be, like we always say in this area, no one wants to be the politician that wants to talk about sex toys. And so,
well, wasn't it famously Queen Victoria outlawed homosexuality between men but not women, because she didn't believe that was a thing?
Yes.
Like, we actually only deal with what we imagine, like it's one of the rare instances in my memory where a modern monarch actually got in the way of what Parliament wanted to do. Good for her in the wrong way. Like, she probably should have just said no to all of it personally. But anyway.
And it's something that you know, people don't necessarily want to think about in a kind of a regulatory way, but there is a lot of evidence that because the law feels uncomfortable and policymakers feel uncomfortable to step into the space, they're not regulating potential risks. So we don't necessarily always have toys that are made from the best materials. These companies often can collect a lot of data, a lot of information about you, and again, this thing is not regulated. But the danger is if that we said, oh, we need this to be regulated, there's a chance that the law would step in and go too far. So, for example, if we say, oh, look, these some sex toys are made out of harmful materials in the plastics, well, what's to say that politicians won't just ban them, right?
Altogether.
Rather than ban them altogether, rather than regulate the materials that are in it to make it to increase the benefits. So often the law is a very blunt instrument. It's incredibly uncomfortable with dealing with benefits of intimacy, and it's only interested in dealing with risk. And so we see a very big clash there around kind of the regulation of intimacy. But if we do look, there are like intimate technologies that can be incredibly harmful, and really, there's when I've spoken to students about this and others, people are like, why do deepfakes even exist? What is the point, right?
Yeah.
Have we not just created a technology that was always going to be misused, right?
Well, and I find this really interesting, actually. It's like this question of why, and it makes me think of my mother. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. That kind of question. But there's also, like, there's so much that we don't know. So much that we don't know about the way that our brains work. I mean, 20 years ago when social media was coming up, the kinds of, like, nobody was thinking this could lead to an increase in young women self-harming.
Yeah.
Like, that was not, like, how on earth would those two things correlate?
Yeah.
And yet clearly I don't think it's even vaguely contentious to say that there is a correlation between those things.
Yes. And seeing, increase risk of body image issues in men that weren't there before, or were much more minimal. But then also on the opposite side, seeing, a growth in what I call extreme misogyny, which to the point of terrorism, around people like Andrew Tate and some other kind of commentators that are using, are able to manipulate these kind of algorithms to put forth these messages that are seem incredibly appealing and simple, but really are fueling incredibly harmful practices. And that's where
at the time that we're recording this, it's only on the weekend there was an assassination attempt on the former US president. Many of us, my views will not be a surprise to anyone there. But at the end of the day, we're seeing this absolute, like, politics itself being completely amplified, and these very binary positions. And we all know this is a theme that we're talking about the whole way through. We get the news that we expect. The algorithm will treat us in a particular way. I'm constantly seeing the differences between the algorithms, what my kids see, just as news. Before you even get into thinking about, well, what do they see or have to deal with if they're looking for some kind of intimacy? Which just terrifies me, I have to say. Like, as pretty much old enough to be your grandmother, like, it's terrifying. And I can understand why politicians are like, no, that's just all too hard for us.
Yeah, it's all too hard to deal with it in a nuanced way, but then they do feel, and we, if we look at deepfakes, so deepfake technology, most of you would already know, it developed a number of years ago, and it's really grown in accuracy and relatability, and it essentially uses, two programs that talk to one another and to pick up the faults in each other until they no longer can pick up errors. And I always determine, when people ask me what deepfakes are, I'm like, it's technology that allows someone to create images and videos and recordings of you saying and doing something that you never said or did, right? You never said or did that, and it's able to make it seem like you said and did that. And so this is incredibly terrifying. And if we think, so let's think about politics, because yes, Donald Trump, at least, you know, and there'll be lots of investigations, but it certainly appears there was an assassination attempt on Donald Trump over the weekend. But, you know, turning back to Andrew Tate, he's also been now charged in both the UK and the US, and there's talk of him being extradited from Romania, where he's currently facing sex exploitation and slavery charges. And actually, let's go back to Andrew Tate. So,
sorry, that's my distraction.
No, it's fine. But if we think about someone like Andrew Tate, who is a online abuser and has used technology to recruit women and then enslave them and force them to work as sex workers and then take their money, he was found because he decided he didn't like Taylor Swift and posted a video with a pizza box in the background, and the police were able to locate him based on the pizza box that was in the background of that video. And so an incredibly, you know, not only a technologically astute person has been found. So I think that there is this real dichotomy about everything's anonymous online, but is it really anonymous online? Okay, so we have to keep that in mind when we think about technology. If we think about deepfake technology, while there are really serious implications for politics and misinformation around politics, and I believe we will see an increase of that, it is almost 100%. It's like something like 95 or 96% of deepfake technology is currently used for the creation of non-consensual pornography or pornographic images of mostly women. Okay. So this is an incredibly gendered issue. It's also related to gender identity. So trans women and trans men as well, obviously targeted, as well as people that identify as not heterosexual. Okay. So we see this as an incredibly gendered gender identity and sexuality issue. And the law, as with most technologies, is incredibly has really struggled to deal with that issue, and we can talk about, you know, lots of reasons why. But I don't know if you had any other questions you wanted to ask before I get into that, Kath.
Well, I think one of the things I want us to really talk about is what should and could the law do. So as we've been progressing through this course, we've looked at lots of different things. We've looked, and the ones that kind of scream out that are likely to be relevant here, we've looked at torts. So we've looked at the question of if you cause somebody harm, or if you do something and your neighbour is affected by it and it was foreseeable that harm was caused, then should you be responsible for it? And this week in particular, we're looking at crime. And so one of the key messages I hope we're engaging with is you can do a bad thing, but unless there's legislation in Australia anyway that says it's a crime, then effectively it's not necessarily a crime. And so actually, you know, what is it that we're asking the law to do? So I've got at one hand, well, what's the right kind of law? What should policy makers be looking at? But secondly, it's like, who should be responsible here? One of the other themes that we're looking at is it the person who's making the decision to create these reprehensible images? Is it the carrier of those images? Is it the people delivering those images? Where should the responsibility lie? And is it a combination of all of those things? And you know, and then to go back, for those of you who are very much on the permissionless innovation side, you know, there is an element, and I'll quote straight from Avenue Q, the internet is for porn. You know, internet Many of the technological advantages that we have came out ultimately from pornography and gambling on the internet. Like if those industries hadn't invested, we wouldn't be in the situation we are today. So, no, if we look at the whole world, now, I mean, I can't even say it with a straight face because I so don't believe that. But I do respect the rights of others of you to believe that and to come back with the ways in which you think we need to, in a lessig sense, regulate these kind of behaviours.
Yeah. And I mean, I think so. I just a couple of things. Like I because I work in, looking at the benefits of intimate technology, I don't want to shame people that do watch pornography, and or engage in pornography, who create and enjoy that process. There's a lot of research around the joy that comes from the creation of amateur images and amateur sexual images and stuff like that. So there's,
and I agree, and I could have been misunderstood in the way that I framed that. When I say reprehensible images or artifacts, what I am talking about is I am thinking about a product or an output that impacts somebody who has not consented to being a part of that image or output.
Yes.
And that impacts them. And some of the science indicates that that has far-reaching effects, not just on the person who has been held out to have participated in that activity, but on the other people who see that and their understanding and reputation for that person.
Yeah, definitely. So that was going to be my next point, is that the issue here is not that it was sex or porn involved. The issue is here that it happened without consent. And a lot of people, there's a lot of discussion around, well, is this, that sometimes people do say consent, but do say yes, but under coercion. So no consent and not free of coercion as well too. So the issue is here is that we've got a creation of a sexual or intimate image or video or recording, audio recording, for example, without consent, and that's not free of coercion. And so that's where the harm comes from. And as you said, there is a lot of evidence that demonstrates the significant harm. And it's not just about there's it's similar to hate speech. People feel attacked, they feel fearful, they feel sick, mental health issues, but it has a strong silencing effect. And it is frequently used against women who act in ways that people do not like. There is no so if we look back at the Taylor Swift scenario that happened at the start of the year, there is no way to deny that there is at least some connection to the fact that Taylor Swift had started appearing on football screens because she was dating someone who plays American football. And every now and then, the camera goes to her, right? And so she has entered a space where she is not meant to be. And in that way, this deepfake pornography was created in an attempt to shame and silence her.
Yeah.
Right? And so this ties into societal treatment of a marginalized communities. So that's the first point. So there's not only is there individual harms, but there are societal harms around these types of things. In terms of the law, these images really disgustingly, and this technology is still being used and is being used to create child sexual exploitation material. So it is being used to create images of young people and people under the age of 18. Now, that is illegal. It has been illegal. It is illegal in Australia to draw images of young kids having sex. Like child sexual exploitation material in all forms is illegal. So what we're talking about here is the legal space around this in the adult creation of adult
and
sexual images.
Nicole, you've made a really important point that I think it's really important, particularly for business students, to kind of stop and think. It's just often we're in a situation we think, well, there should be a law against that. And when we really should be thinking perhaps is like, is there already a law
Mhm,
or a
mhm,
process or a legal framework that might apply to this particular scenario?
yeah.
So we talk a little bit about, the law students all use IRAC. I
Mhm,
always tell them to stop, use IRAP. So as in, what's the issue? What's the rule? So is there a rule that actually is analogous? And how does it apply to these facts?
mhm.
And let's predict the outcome.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah, yeah. I
actually
rap. That's good. I
predict.
like that. Yeah.
I know I'm on a solo campaign to change what we do because it's like unless you're a high court judge, you don't get to conclude, right? And even then, you need at least two buddies on your side.
No, that's
Uh,
true. That's very true. And when I do say a conclusion, students go, "Do I say what's going to happen?" I said, "You've got to tentatively conclude." I always
yeah,
throw in
or
the tentative
predict.
conclusion, but predict is much better. But and I know someone that says,
Anyway,
"I."
just as a little aside.
I know, I know. Anyway, we could leave that alone. But yes, no, it's there's there the law is all about language. So
Absolutely.
and language is incredibly important, particularly for statutes. And so for one of the big issues around deepfakes is that there has been, up until recently, a number of the states and territories, while they had criminalized the distribution of intimate images without consent, what other people know as revenge porn. So someone may have taken the photo of you in secret, or you've sent a picture of yourself, either sexually or naked or something like that, to a partner with consent, and then they've shared it on further. That is a crime. However, that image wasn't defined as an altered image, and
Yeah.
so deepfakes weren't covered. And actually, like speaking to the e-safety commissioner, they're like, there's lots of ways to alter images that don't include deepfakes, right? Plenty of people will just like literally cut and paste,
Yeah.
right? Like use Photoshop. And so they
And then there's a
started covering.
continuum there too, isn't
Yes,
there?
there
Like,
is. Yes, yeah,
I'm coming to you today without any filters or not even makeup, right?
yeah,
But actually, it's relatively rare for me to post an image of myself where I haven't like done a little bit of touching up somewhere along the
yep,
line. Like,
yep.
so there's a continuum all the
Mhm,
way through,
mhm, yep,
um,
yeah.
and that adds to the complexity.
It adds to the complexity, and so this is why language and why the law is constantly, when it comes to technology, the law, this kind of, oh my god, a new technology create a new law, a new technology create a new
Yeah,
law, the law will always be behind. And we are starting to see a push for what we call regulation. And so regulation doesn't really sit in the civil space. It's not about suing someone. It doesn't really sit in the criminal space where it's about prosecuting someone for a crime. It's about regulating the space to ensure that the space has these overarching principles and thought bubbles
mm,
that are put into law. And so organizations and individuals that operate in the space have a guiding set of legally enforceable principles to guide their decision making and their innovation. And so the law needs to step more into that space, particularly when it comes to businesses involved in the creation of technology. And so you raise a really good point about like who's actually responsible. So let's think about deepfake sexual imagery,
yep,
non-consensual deepfake sexual imagery, or pornography, if you want to call it that. Who's responsible? Well, the person who created it, right? The person who made the choice to create that image. Yes, that person may also then be the person who distributes it, or someone else may distribute it. So those people are individually criminally responsible for engaging in that act. But there's also two other groups or
yep,
people that should be responsible: the platform that hosts it, and then of course the business that created the technology that allows that
yep.
image to be created. And those are two groups that also need to be held to some kind of account. Now, that's where regulation fits in really well, because we can regulate in Australia saying, Facebook, you cannot host this. And if you host this material, we can issue you a notice. And if you don't remove that material within 24 hours, we can fine you. And that's what
Yep.
we have in Australia. Unfortunately, because of the international extraterritorial nature of the
We talk
internet,
a lot about jurisdiction, and actually,
yes,
it's worth just reminding students too. A large proportion, probably 40% odd, of our students come from countries outside of Australia and will
Yeah.
probably return to them, many of which have civil law systems, some of which have Sharia law or other religious legal systems, again, which approach these problems in
very different ways.
Yeah, well, very different ways, but overlapping ways. But the logic that we're using here is really useful. And we can think about analogies, like the companies that design and make the drugs, the people who prescribe and sell the drugs, the people who use the drugs. They're three different activities with three different legal status. So
definitely.
And so we can, again, I just want to keep coming back to, law is hard, but we see patterns over and over again, and we can learn from other types of activities or other, and drugs is a good one here because drugs can do so much good, and they can do so much bad. Drugs can make you feel really good, but they can have really negative consequences. So we're like actually getting that balance is a really important regulatory outcome.
Yeah, and that's why we have regulation around it, right? So there's like the drug manufacturers have to get approval for that new drug before they manufacture it, and then it's available for doctors who have another set of regulation around who they can prescribe things to and the amount they can prescribe things to. And then you've got the users, and users also have a regulation around them. People probably don't know, but in some instances it is illegal to give people drugs that you have been prescribed. And whether it's like you could face criminal consequences or perhaps you could face civil consequences, like you've breached your duty of care and someone could sue you. So yes, it's a really good analogy because we have like, we have the companies that create technologies, and deepfakes is really hard because that was an open source code, and so now we've got all these different platforms that are allowing you to create these deepfake technologies, and some of them are more legitimate, as in they say this technology is not to be used to create pornography non-consensually. But if 96% of pornography is being created non-consensually, this technology has been used to create these images, well, that's a useless statement. And then we have others that are literally designed for that.
You have to say sorry and you have to mean it.
Yes, and like Telegraph has literally has groups that are dedicated to creating deepfake sexual imagery of young children and sharing it with each other. So there are and again, so where's the legal responsibility of Telegraph? So Telegraph has a legal responsibility not to host that material. Unfortunately, in Australia, it is incredibly difficult for us to enforce those laws. We are seeing the difficulty we are currently having getting Elon Musk to even give about Australian laws and sends back poop emojis to the e-safety commissioner, right? Having said that, on the other hand, we have had the e-safety commissioner has finally gotten quite serious with its enforcement and recently took an individual to court for deepfake sexual imagery of children, and that person refused to remove it because they were living in the Philippines. They stepped back into Australia and were immediately arrested and taken to court by the e-safety commissioner. So there are some interesting kind of things to play in here. But yes, we must remember jurisdiction. We must remember how hard it is to enforce the law. So even if the law exists, which it does in some cases and doesn't in others, we have to know the law exists. It has to actually cover the very specific act we're talking about. It has to be targeted at the right place, and we have to be able to enforce it. And so this is why a lot of people, myself included, and other researchers and other lawyers and other policy people are looking far more at safe design of technology, implementing right from the beginning design principles and safety by design principles that require companies to bring women and gay people and people from different ethnic and religious communities to the table to say, hey, we want to create this great app that allows us to track people. What do you think? I'm sorry, I'm a woman. That's more likely to be used to by my abusive partner to stalk me. Oh, we hadn't thought of that. Okay, let's think about this. Like, the Apple tag has been used notoriously to stalk and harass people, right? Women in particular. So where were women at that table? Why were these safety and by design principles not in place in the first place? And this is where the law is starting to step in. And for those students that, aren't studying law and are innovators, you are going to create some incredible products. But the law does tell you now, and will continue to tell you, that you must think about safety from the beginning.
Yeah.
Because the last thing you want is to create a product that ultimately ends up causing significant harm. And that's where you need to think about safety by design from the beginning. The law is going to increasingly force you to do that. But also, you may have legal implications down the track if you do not think about it at the beginning.
Yeah, and it gets really overwhelming, right? Because, often those of us who don't think that way, we don't, these students have heard many times, probably by now, we're recording before the semester starts, but it happens, one of my early career involvements is with some facial recognition technology.
Mm-hmm.
Long story short, it worked perfectly all the time, except for me. I was like the invisible woman. I could not ever seem to be there. It was probably 3 or 4 years, like this was late 90s, early 2000s. It was years later when we suddenly realized, oh, yeah, I'm a girl. Like, I did actually know I was a girl, by the way. And I'm pretty sure all of my colleagues did too, but it was also an environment where we weren't really thinking I'm the only woman.
Yes.
And one of the things this technology was very good at was being able to differentiate between like a picture on the wall and an actual human face. And like it just could, I was invisible. I was a picture on the wall, I was basically my late 30s. I was, going into that invisible woman phase of my life. I just found it funny at the time. But again, I didn't think like that. And my colleagues weren't really thinking like that either. That's actually why they call it a bias, right? It's one of the reasons why it's an unconscious bias is you're not conscious of it.
Yes. Yep.
And so, like literally, we're not kind of working this out as to why it won't work for me. It just seemed to be just me. It worked literally for everyone else. But again, we've all got our unconscious biases. They help us navigate the world. They help us make sense of things around us. We would be stuck trying to make decisions all the time. But we don't necessarily know what they are or see them straight away. And we don't necessarily imagine ways that we could use these technologies to harangue and harass other people.
Yeah.
And we definitely don't understand what the long-term psychological impacts of those things are.
Definitely, we do not.
So, at the same time, I'm certainly not a permissionless innovation person, but at the same time, unless we explore and experiment in some kind of safe way, are we limiting our opportunities to make the world a better place? How do we get that balance right?
It's a good point, Kath, and probably one to kind of leave the students with, because I do think this is something, and people will come down differently on different sides of this, and this is obviously about
as they should,
of course, but there are reasons why we don't do human testing. There's reasons why to go right back to the Nazis and the Holocaust, there was horrible things done to people in the set, for experiments, and we don't use that data because that is just unethical and it led to so much human suffering. And so we have always imposed limits, right, on things, because we recognize humanity and we recognize harm and risk. And so this is not a new thing. We haven't always been able to create without constant consequences and without thinking about risk and harm. It's just now there are other groups that perhaps have more voice, so we're hearing different voices a little bit more, and technology has been around now for long enough that we understand and we can predict a bit more accurately what potential risks are. And so you've never been free to create completely freely. this has happened to every generation. A lot of people will say, oh, back in my day it was better, blah blah blah, but they also had limitations. Yeah, we've always had limitations.
Yeah.
So make sure whatever it is you're doing, it's not going to cause harm. Bring people to the table that can tell you and talk to you about the product, and I tell you what, your product will be better. It is ultimately going to be better. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. This is a really great spot for us to end. I really want to thank you, Nicole, for your generosity and your time with us today. I know this will be fodder for really interesting conversations in the tutorial. I will put my 2 cents in because my own version of the solution to that last question is actually people like you, the future CEOs, the future CFOs, the future general counsel, barristers and lawyers, because you have taken the time to think more broadly, not just about what can you do, but what should you do. I think that will make the world a better place. And I remain romantically optimistic about the future, largely because I get to spend time with you guys. So thank you, Nicole, and thank you all
so
for
much.
listening.
Thank you for having me.
I'll see you in class.
Thank you.